Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to another episode of The Ways We Move, the podcast that talks about innovative mobility solutions and the people behind them. My name is Nicolas Zart, and I am your host on this podcast that is in its second season. Yes, now over 1 year, 1,300 downloads for such a niche podcast. It's absolutely amazing, and we're looking forward to much, much more. Soon we'll be launching our Patreon website where you can get our enhanced version of the podcast, and we're going to call it The Ways We Move Plus. You'll have 48 hours early access to these interviews, and you'll also be able to have one deep dive a month, if not more, on a lot of these amazing companies that we are regularly in touch with and we happen to know. Speaking of which, our next guest is someone I've admired for many, many years. I remember when the company was started, and that's Elroy Air, and it's Dave Merrill, who is the founder and was the acting CEO up until last year, when he gave that job over to someone else. Now, what's fascinating about Elroy Air is that they, like many of these companies that started in 2016, right around then, everybody was going towards the passenger eVTOL side of things. But a lot of them also transition, some only focused on the propulsion drivetrain, some just went in a different direction, as is the case of what Dave did with Elroy Air, is to go into cargo and drone instead of passengers eVTOL. And even then, they decided from early on to go into dual mode. So to have one aircraft that can work for the civilian commercial market, but also the military aspect. And also was one of the very first ones to think about how do we fly these drones way beyond visual line of sight where we can't see them anymore. And also having a hybrid platform so that you extend the performance of the drone. So these guys thought about it a long time ago. But what I like most about these guys is that they're very pragmatic. They're very, method driven. They don't go too fast. They don't have a lot of fancy and flashy, flamboyant press releases. They do it, they get it done. And in here, you'll also find out towards the end of this podcast what is Dave's motivation. And this is, again, why I respect people like Dave, because there's a human aspect to why they're doing this. It's not just the technology for the sake of technology, but it's using a technology that doesn't exist yet or is in the conceptual stage. And right now, it's already being tested, but to help and to further or to better our human experience on this planet. So here we go. Listen to what Dave Merrill has to say, and then don't forget to like, to subscribe, and please share if you think this would be interesting to, somebody who's interested in electric air mobility. Thank you. Well, Dave, thank you for being on The Ways We Move, the podcast that highlights innovative mobility solutions. And, I guess why don't we start with introduction? Who is Dave?
Sure. Thanks for having me on. I am the co-founder of Elroy Air and executive chairman. I'm a technologist by background, grew up in California, spent a research portion of my career in the early days developing hardware, software systems, primarily for human-computer interaction. And then I've got some pilots in my family, and I've been a long time avid photographer, and that drew me toward things that fly. And so I had a first company that I spun out of my graduate research work that was acquired by one of the early drone makers here in California, in the Bay Area. And I got to work on a camera drone for consumer and prosumer aerial video and photography. And that was such an interesting experience. We were going head to head against DJI at the time, which was very formidable opponent, very challenging, but I learned a ton and recognized there was all these other things that could be done with drones that nobody was doing yet. And I was hooked. I was fascinated. And so I started Elroy Air late 2016 as a co-founder and CEO, and have been building the company, team, technology, traction with customers and partners ever since. I'm sure we'll get deeper into that, but that's in a nutshell who I am.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we share similar backgrounds, and my background is in IT. I run Linux at home. Actually, I used to program on mainframes way back in the 80s. So I was really impressed with your background, and especially going into the robotics, and also a few things that really surprised me, which we'll get to a little bit later. And I'm very in awe of how you managed all of it. Tell us a little bit about, originally, if I recall well, you also had an eVTOL, a passenger eVTOL plan, and then you pivoted towards drone, which, by the way, tip my hat to you. Of course, that's, that's the best way to do it. Tell us a little bit about those early days of Elroy Air.
Sure, sure. So this is people in the startup community talk about the pivot, where a company started out doing one thing and then they recognized that they should course correct towards something that isn't totally different from where they started, but it's different
Right.
enough that I think it's a basketball term where you're like keeping one foot planted and then you move the other foot. And so
Ah,
we pivoted. Yeah, that's where it comes from, I think.
I didn't know.
So yeah, so my co-founder and I, rewind to 2013, 2014. Each of us live in San Francisco. We're working for this company, 3D Robotics, that I don't think it really exists anymore. But
I don't think it does. Yeah.
we're driving across the Bay Bridge every day to go back and forth to build this drone, and thinking we're wasting all this time sitting in traffic. This is not an original thought. This is the same thought that launched all the air taxi companies. But we're having this experience and we're feeling deputized by knowing a bit about the technology for drones. And so we had this thought like, hey, it's got to be a better way. Why can't a drone pick me up at the waterfront in San Francisco and just fly me over to Berkeley? Get there in 5 minutes instead of
Yeah.
sitting on the Bay Bridge for 20, 30, 45 minutes, an hour if there's an
45
accident,
minutes. Yeah.
you know? So we had this thought like, there's got to be a better way. Wouldn't that be a huge time saving? And if you save people time, they can keep that surplus devoted to more productive things, whether it's, make more progress with their work or more time with their family. And so we thought, yeah, this is something that's worth considering. And so we had this deep session where we mapped it all out and got excited and realized, hey, the technology is here, or we can build it. There's no unobtainium thing that we're never going to be
Hmm.
able to do from a technology point of view. Regulatory at that time was still kind of not
Yep.
fully not in focus, but we thought, well, we'll figure that out. It's like entrepreneurs start things without having the entire pathway mapped sometimes. And so we launched in, and then really in the first 6 months, I think we continued to get more and more convinced that the technology we could do that. But carrying passengers is really the highest possible bar.
Yep. Yep.
And this is the early days of air taxi companies. I think Joby was around already. Archer was not
Yep.
yet around.
Nope.
So as it kind of dawned upon us what a long journey and how hard it would be to build a system that would reliably carry passengers and have the appropriate approvals from a regulatory point of view to do that. I started to have some early conversations that got us focused on cargo and logistics.
Yeah.
And it's really a very similar problem from a technology point of view. Can you design,
Yep.
a larger drone that can reliably pick up cargo in one place and fly it somewhere else and drop it off and do that all day for high utilization? And I guess I can tell a couple of the stories of how our eyes were open to the cargo need and got convinced that was the thing to do. We're building a dual use company. So Elroy
Yeah.
Air is building a system that will be used both for
Perfect.
military, for resupply, for soldiers getting material to where it needs to go, and for commercial shipping and what you might call kind of industrial shipping. And so, the first time I went to the Pentagon was in the summer of 2017. And
Mm.
I had found a connection to a Marine who was back from Afghanistan and was in this sprint to try to find autonomy solutions and drone solutions that could be put to
Wow.
work back in Afghanistan to get more done and keep soldiers out of harm's way when they were
Yeah.
doing the
Yeah.
things that they needed to do every day. And so this was, 6 months, fewer than 9 months into the company. So we had not built this drone yet, but we got to the point at that
Wow.
moment where I had some renders showing what it could be. We kind of started to shift our attention away, and we were really evaluating the potential of a cargo system and trying to understand if that would be a good product that would add value in the world. And so I showed him this render that we had made of a big cargo drone and talked to him about it for 10 or 15 minutes. And he responded so strongly. He said, yes, if I had that, I would take that back with me to Afghanistan next month and we'd use it a lot. And
Yeah.
that really like turned on a light bulb for me when I
Yeah.
heard that.
Yeah.
That clear customer feedback saying, yes, build this and we'll use it. And so then I had some other similar experiences. So for example, the first Uber Elevate conference happened, and
That's right.
most of the speakers were talking about the passenger opportunity, right? That was the focus at the time of Uber Elevate air taxi. So a lot of talks about vertiports and battery energy density and community acceptance. And then this one lieutenant
Yep.
general from the Army got up and gave a talk and was talking about the battlefield logistics challenges that the Army faces. And he said, we have this problem of like, how do you get this
Yeah.
stuff over here to those guys, those troops over there? And how do you do it safely and reliably and every day?
Quietly.
And so, yeah. And
It's a
so
little
he
bit
said, I
quieter than a
think,
helicopter.
yeah, all of you here are developing new technology that I know you're mostly focused on carrying passengers with it. But if I could direct your attention over to this logistics problem, we really have a need for this technology that you're developing. And so that was one of these other light bulb moments on the defense side. I also found my way to talk with people at FedEx. And
Yeah.
when I presented them the idea, they responded with, yeah, a couple 100 pounds, couple 100 miles, autonomous delivery drone. We'd use a lot of those. Similarly, had a discussion with someone at the World Food Program, and they told me the same thing. So
Uh,
I just
yep.
got this triangulation of customer feedback that gave me conviction that if we build a cargo drone that can go a few 100 miles and carry a few 100 pounds at a time, autonomously, safely, at the right price point, that's going to be a huge unlock for logistics of all types. And that's the early, what, in startup circles would be called customer development. And
Right.
so that was what we were doing at that time. As we continued to progress the technology, we were out making sure that we understood how will people want to use this and will this be useful?
Right.
Can this be a hit product, basically?
So this is something that's always attracted me about you guys, because believe it or not, in 2014, I had heard of you. I was a journalist. I was also working with the Vertical Flight Society. So, of course, eVTOL.news/aircraft. You're one of the very first 30 projects that we were monitoring. And also the dual use makes perfect sense. But one of the things that I found really incredible is how you repositioned the company within a year. And you also did something at the time that really intrigued me. You weren't pushing a technology in an unknown environment. You were listening to feedback. What does it serve? What does it do? Who needs it potentially? And who doesn't even know that they need it? And so that's what turned me on very early to what you were doing. And then, of course, later on, I did see you speak and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And also, even to this day, I think your press releases are the perfect cadence, and it's just not flashy or anything like that, which is perfect because I think we're sort of crawling under way too much information and futuristic plans. And it's true, Uber Elevate, as well as it was the impetus. I mean, it gave us the impetus, but it was unrealistic. And they were always talking about energy density when eVTOLs, more than anything, need power density. So, of course, a lot of maturity happened throughout the years and everything. Tell us a little bit more about what you're doing these days then, or the transition up until now.
Sure. So we got on the pathway of developing the aircraft and technology to build the aircraft that we call Chaparral. And
Yep.
Chaparral is a cargo drone that's built to carry 300 pounds over a 300-mile range. So that's the design point, is 300 pounds of payload all across a 300-mile range. Of course, because it is let me back up. It's a hybrid electric system, which is
Right.
one of the technology decisions that we made
Yes.
more than 5 years ago now, which put us on a divergent pathway from most of the other electric VTOL developers. And again, that came from customer feedback as we talked to people in the military and humanitarian aid communities and commercial shippers. We realized these range specs that are possible with a battery electric VTOL aircraft are not, by and large, going to solve the problem for middle mile logistics or these
Yeah,
austere
right.
logistics needs. And
Right.
for two reasons. One, the range is not going to be enough for many of these
Yep.
missions. And number two, the infrastructure to do battery charging all the time is not
Thank
going to be
you.
there.
Yeah. They don't
And
take that
so
into consideration when they talk about autonomy. Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, electric propulsion is beautiful. Electric motors, very simple, they're very robust, they last a long time, there's not many moving
Yeah.
parts, not much can go wrong if they're designed well, right? So that's the appeal of electric propulsion, and it can be quieter, but batteries just aren't there yet to support these logistics missions. And so that realization that we had as we kind of ran the numbers and looked at the trade space and looked at the needs that our customers and partners were telling us led us to decide, okay, let's take the best of both worlds. Electric propulsion is
Hmm.
great, but we have to have a power plant that can handle longer
Yep.
range and doesn't require that infrastructure. And so we got to work, we got our first engine, 2020,
Oh,
started to
wow.
spin
Okay.
it and build around it and
Yeah, that's
characterize
right. I
it, learn how to
remember.
use it.
Yep.
And so we've been developing this hybrid turboshaft hybrid electric system for years now, and flew our Chaparral aircraft with it for the first time in 2023. And we're the first company ever to fly not just a eVTOL, but any aircraft that was a turboshaft hybrid. So that was
Wow.
a
Okay.
record,
I didn't know that.
um, you know, setting flight, first of its kind, and then have been flying now, flight proving this aircraft for more than 2 years of test flights out at our airport facility. And so that was a technology direction that we set ourselves on early because of the needs of our customers and what was demanded by
Yeah.
them for this vehicle, and have matured a system that's now working very reliably. And then one thing that has been interesting in the past year has been to see almost all of the battery eVTOL companies decide that they need a hybrid variant too
Of course.
for the same reasons that we started there.
Yeah.
So that's been
Yeah.
kind of interesting to see it and validating. And we've talked with many of them about whether we could help them out.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. I mean, Eve just bought Beta's propeller technology. This should go to you for that. And actually, that's another thing too that you mentioned back in 2008 when we were talking about EVs. I was working in the electric vehicle. Actually, not. I was in Long Beach, not too far away, and we were always talking about that. We really need the infrastructure. It's not happening and everything. But you know who bought the very first EVs were? Well, fleet owners, because reliably every day, 40 miles, 60 miles, 80 miles, maybe even 100 miles, the data that OEMs got from that made everything possible today. And only after that, people started buying EVs kind of thing, except for the purists in the beginning. So that I think was very smart that you transitioned directly to cargo. And you're right. As of about 2 years ago, I think a lot of companies are starting to see the appeal of cargo, and they're all going in that direction. One question I did have for you, and I don't know if you're at liberty to talk about it, the design of your turbo shaft, did you guys come up from scratch, or did you actually use another partner for this, or are you relying on something that's out there?
So we have done a lot of integration and
Good.
development of fully integrated systems. And so with regard to the turbo generation, we didn't design the engine. We're
Yeah, because
using an
that's
off-the-shelf engine.
okay. Good. Yeah.
Yeah, you could have a whole company to design good
I
turboshaft
was going to
engines.
say that's a decade and a new company. I was like, how did you manage to shoehorn that in 5 years? That's impressive.
Yeah, no, and it's maybe another topic we could talk about is vertical
Yeah.
integration. We're
Yes.
trying to be very pragmatic and
Yes.
deliberate about which pieces of this technology we develop in-house
Oh,
versus
yes.
which pieces we find off the shelf, COTS items, and integrate. So
Absolutely.
we're really good at that integration of
Yes.
disparate systems, making them work together reliably, and that is what we've done with an off-the-shelf engine, off-the-shelf generator. We have a lot of custom mechanical parts that integrate those
Of
together,
course.
cooling, and especially software. that creates a
Yes.
system that can reliably keep these disparate pieces working together and providing power that's demanded by the vehicle, which is, that's a deep rabbit hole of its own. How do you
Of
get the
course.
the power needs met of a electric VTOL aircraft by a
Phew.
combination of a battery and a turbo generator? And that's where a lot of the magic has happened of our team's hard engineering work.
Of course. Right. Right. And I'm assuming it's obviously a parallel system. It can't be a series system, right? The actual turbo shaft
It
itself?
Well, it is a series hybrid in the sense that the turboshaft engine is not directly turning a propeller. It
Okay, good.
is
Yeah.
charging a battery and providing, high voltage power onto a
Yep.
bus, which charges the
Right.
battery and then also drives propulsion directly.
Propulsion, yeah. Because I was
Yeah.
looking at Volta Aero, decided to do direct propulsion and also recharging or being a generator, so acting as both. So sometimes it's when I look at these super complicated parallel and series hybrid system, I'm thinking, oh, that's a lot of extra weight. How does that work and everything? So your solution is very pragmatic, of course.
Yeah, I think, it's not maybe the only way you could do this, but by decoupling the generation of electrical power from all the propulsion, you have more design flexibility on which things you're choosing for the power generation side and then the power consumption side.
Yeah, absolutely. So another thing too that impresses me is way back in 2014, you were doing something that we barely started to take a big stab at last year, and that's BVLOS. And for people who don't know what that means, it's flying beyond line of visual sight. So you guys had already seen all of that. How did you consider that? I mean, how did you see it back then for
Mm.
300 miles, or did you have any ideas?
Well, the company started in 2016. So in 2014, I was still working on
Sorry, yes.
smaller drones at 3D
Sorry, you're
Robotics,
right.
and we were thinking about BVLOS at that time. It was
Okay.
a pretty early moment. I think, groups like In Situ were some of the pioneers in getting BVLOS and like flying down railroads and visual spotters.
Yes.
And at that time,
Yep.
it had been demonstrated, but not in a way that was scalable.
No.
And so when we started working this at Elroy Air, that was actually also part of the thinking, was because we are going to transport cargo. And because we can build a business that, at least in the beginning, operates in pretty austere areas with very low ground risk, like flying over water or flying over very unpopulated areas, that's the right kind of stepping stone to what will ultimately be BVLOS flights over any any terrain, any city, but that's not where we need to start. And so I think this is something that new businesses have to figure out often, is like, what's the initial starting point, the stepping stone that gets you into the market, gets you competitive and building a business with revenues, and then you work your way toward a bigger and bigger opportunity. So we're
True.
today we're flying primarily at our airport facility. We're in Byron, California, which is out kind of near the East Bay, a little further out past Livermore. Um, and we're building up to starting BVLOS flights by the end of this year.
Wow. So you guys are really pragmatic about it. You're not jumping headfirst into anything, but you've proven yourself, which is exactly how you come across on the other side of, the journalistic side. Is we're always thought these guys are really pragmatic. So, but you just confirmed that right now again. One thing that we did talk about at one point is, and I wanted to broach that topic with you, is for some strange reason in advanced air mobility in the industry, there is such a sort of schism between both the passenger eVTOLs and the drone industry. And it behooves most of us as to why, because we're doing more or less
Hmm.
the same thing. One just, has cargo, the other one has human lives. Why do you think there's such a sort of two different poles in this industry, and they don't really talk to one another despite working more or less on the same technology?
They do. We do talk to each other sometimes. So I think there are people that flow back and forth in the industry that
Yeah.
work on both.
Yep.
Engineers or even leaders sometimes go and start companies in the other
That's
domain.
true. That's true.
I think what unites us is we're building typically building new vehicles, and we're building new vehicles that involve some technology that hasn't been deployed before in
Right.
aviation. So there is kind of a fellowship, let's say, of everybody working
Yeah.
on new aircraft concepts out there. I think maybe what's different, what you're pointing at, is there will be kind of different deployment strategies,
Ooh, yes.
and maybe different regulatory constraints or pathways that these different parts of the market find. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the things about cargo that we believe and we're finding to be true is that the regulatory pathways to getting cargo drones up and flying are more accelerated
Yeah.
versus if you were trying to do a similar thing carrying passengers. And naturally so. The risk
Yes.
profile of flying goods is much lower than if you're
Yeah.
flying the most precious cargo. So I
Yep.
think that's probably the biggest reason why you see people in their own worlds in this industry is that we've got kind of these different deployment trajectories that we're on to do different kinds of missions in different places. And that just it requires maniacal focus to get anything new into the market. And so we're all focused on the thing that we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think you said it well because they're really different. Even though they're the same type of technologies, or different profiles, there's different things that go into it. Absolutely, and an eVTOL carrying passengers, I guess you could convert it to cargo, but then it changes everything. Then you have a different focus. So I was
Yeah.
thinking
Now,
more of it
usually,
in terms of
sorry.
events, really, basically. No, no, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's something that I think people often puzzle about. Like, is that easy? Is that hard to do? And I think usually aircraft, because they're so physics constrained, they tend to be built for the mission that is the intended
Hmm,
mission. And they're built around. Historically, airplanes are built around an engine. You start from the engine, and then you figure out what kind of
true,
airplane you can wrap around that.
true.
And so the conversion potential of like taking eVTOLs and putting them to work for cargo, I think is a lot harder than it sounds. Right? You
Yes,
can you can say things like, "Oh, just rip the seats out and put goods in there," and you can do that, but like it's really a deeper surgery if you're trying to fit the logistics use case. Like primarily, like I mentioned earlier,
yes,
the power plant, like battery electric doesn't go very far, needs infrastructure. Hybrid goes further, just needs fuel. And the conversion of an aircraft from battery electric to hybrid electric is no joke. Like that's a deep
yeah,
deep
yes,
surgery.
yes,
Maybe a clean sheet program to really do it
yes.
right.
Yeah, we actually had Kevin Nordiker from Ampere, and we talked a lot about that, and it really is. I mean, it's surgery. That's all it is, really. You're replacing a lot of things. That's why I'm always wondering how Beta was able to do what they're doing now by having an eCTOL cargo when they originally had planned it. Because once you do that cabin for passenger, you're right. You have a different constraint inside that space, and cargo may or may not fit in it, which is always amazing when I look at Airbus and Boeing when they switch over passenger to cargo these aircraft. And that's a lot of work that needs to be done. And again, you're still dealing with a fuselage that was meant to carry people, not necessarily cargo, or have people have cargo. So, yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. Are you
Hmm.
guys looking at all into other markets? I'm talking about international markets like Europe and everything. Because since if you're working with the military, I'm assuming that there are some places you can't go. Is this on the radar, or are you domestic only for
Yeah.
now?
No, we are. We have already announced this publicly that we have a partnership in Japan. So we work
Oh,
with a
that's
company
right.
called Itochu, and have executed on a contract with the Japanese military. So
Good.
that's the beginning of a lot more to come. And then we also announced in maybe just last month that we have a partner, Bark, in the UAE, which will be
Good.
our UAE partner for both taking initially taking US systems and operating them in UAE. And then as
Okay.
we bring up production, we will bring up a production capability in the UAE as a joint venture together to serve the region. So we're already, based on the kind of demand that we are experiencing from around the world, already laying the groundwork for international deployments.
Yeah, that actually, and I'm sorry, yeah, I missed that. I didn't see that. So that's interesting with UAE because I think one of the biggest questions we all have is, flying eVTOLs, cargo drone or not, at 140 Fahrenheit in the summer. That's going to be pretty interesting considering most of them are air cooled. So the data that you're going to get out of that is going to be fascinating to see.
Yeah, and
Well,
we had a preview of that 18 months ago over the summer. We were invited by the U.S. Marines to bring our system to the Yuma Proving Ground in Arizona
that's
and
right.
fly.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't think it was 140, but it was, you know, pushing
It
100
was up there.
degrees. And
Yep.
when you have an aircraft operating in higher temps, then you learn what you need to do to make sure that it performs the way it needs to. So we've had a bit of that, more to come. But yeah, you're right that different places that we're going to deploy this system around the world will require some unique tailoring of the vehicle to make sure it works in those environments.
Yeah, that's something that I've learned. I'm more on the infrastructure side of thing, and when you design a vertiport or a multi-port, you have to think about North Fargo in the middle of winter. You have to think of Tucson in the middle of summer, and then you have to think of megawatt charging stations with cables this big, and you have to have gloves. And how in the
Mm-hmm.
world does all of that work? So hybrid definitely has a huge appeal
Mm-hmm.
on the
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure side of things for sure. Tell us a little bit about what is happening now with you. You've just stepped down, by the way, from CEO to now you are on the board. Tell us a little bit about that. And the reason why I asked that is because I'm actually trained as a business coach, and the first thing you learn when you go to any kind of coaching certificate or university, in my case, is entrepreneurs are notoriously not the best CEOs or operations people, but those who let go of it are slightly unheard of. So tell me a little bit about how you did that.
Sure. Yeah. So, like I said, I was the co-founder of the company starting in 2016. I had a co-founder, Clint Cope, who started Elroy Air with
Yep.
me.
Yep.
And I was the founding CEO and led the company as CEO for the first 8 years. And
Yeah.
my background is really in that kind of 0 to 1, idea to demonstrated prototype, show that it can work, make sure that it
Yeah.
product market fit. Like that's the part that I think I'm the best at.
Yeah. And you
And
did.
as we got
You proved it.
Yeah, I think so. And so as we got closer to this scaling phase that we're entering, where we're ready to take the demonstrated concept and now put it into production and get a lot of these out in the world, it was a discussion that I had with my board, which was, hey, like, could there be somebody that we hand the baton to that is really the best person to take this company into that scaling phase? And so we ran, and I guess with humility, I don't need to be the CEO of this company forever. That's kind of how I thought about it. It was like, I want to make sure this succeeds, this company getting this system out into the world. And I feel like my role is to facilitate that in whatever way is the right way to do it. And so, I didn't need to be the one in charge as the CEO all the way through. And so we ran this search and I talked to a lot of great people. It was actually
Mm.
really exciting to talk to people and imagine, hey, could this person be a great, next leader for this company? And when we met Andrew Clare, it just
Yep.
all clicked. And so Andrew, I'll tell you a little bit about him, but he joined a little more than a year ago, almost a year and a half
Yep.
ago now. But he's the right person to take this company into that
Hmm.
scaling phase. And actually, if you rewind back to his origin, he was an aerospace guy, studied aerospace at MIT, all the way through
Oh,
graduate degrees, all the way through a doctorate at MIT, and then went into the autonomy for on the roads industry. So he went into self-driving
bingo.
ground autonomy,
Yep. That's
and
right. Yeah. Yeah.
first had a stint in automotive. So he was at Tesla leading the Model X program and had weekly meetings with Elon and learned a ton about scaling a vehicle production.
Yes.
And then went to Neuro, where he was the CTO.
Yep.
Neuro is a self-driving technology company,
Yep.
and was looking for his arc to go back into aerospace. And so we met at the right time.
Oh, wow.
He'd go all the way back to his doctorate at MIT. He did research on how a collection of drones could aid search and rescue. And he was in national defense. Like his PhD was funded by the military, and so he
Wow.
had this original background and was looking for a way to get back into aerospace. And so we met
Wow.
and hit it off and decided collectively, not just me but the whole board, he's the right person to lead. And so I handed the baton to Andrew, and I'm still actually here full time as executive chairman, which is
Of
which is
course.
like, being a founder, kind of back in fungible founder, do what needs to be done mode, which I kind of like. So it's a strategic role, it's a practical role, and
Yeah.
I think we've now set up the leadership trajectory for this company to
Mm.
lead us all the way into this scaled manufactured systems and deployed systems phase.
Yeah, and it's funny because you're saying it as if it was so simple and everything, but it's really rare. It's extremely rare to find someone who has enough self-awareness to know, you gave it birth, you raised it the first few years, and now off you are, you're going with someone else, and it's pretty rare. It doesn't always happen. I found, at least in my 20 years of experience in electric mobility. So kudos for taking that decision. And indeed, he
Thanks.
does have the right background. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So tell us, since now we're talking a little bit about the future, tell us a little bit about the future. What does it look like? Where are you guys heading? What's next on the horizon?
Sure. So we have been taking the aircraft through its validation steps over the past few years, right? The first flight of the full scale Chaparral system was more than 2 years ago now. We spent time expanding the envelope in hover, tuning up the control systems and building out the software
Mm.
more fully. Then started flying transition flights where the aircraft gets wing-borne. So it goes from vertical flight to wing-borne flight. That was last summer. July was the first flight where we transitioned to wing-borne and back. Then we have been flying, let's see, the most recent flight was an A to B flight that we ran where we took off in one location and delivered goods to another location. And so we're just methodically working our way through the the envelope expansion on this vehicle. And then in September, we announced a partnership with Kratos. And
Oh
for
yeah.
your listeners, if you don't know Kratos, Google them. They're a really dynamic public aerospace company, mostly known for their originally for their target drones. These are jet-powered UAVs that provide kind of training for fighter pilots. So imagine you need kind of
That
a
was sick.
pretend adversary that's up there flying like a fighter jet that you can chase or be chased by and shoot it down eventually. And so they've developed this reputation for building these target drones, and they've been building capacity to build other systems too. They've also got a collaborative combat aircraft called the Valkyrie, which is
Mm.
for what gets called colloquially the loyal wingman concept, where you've got a fighter pilot with some drones on their wing that can be part of the battle with them. So their Valkyrie is that market entrant, and they've got deep expertise in building carbon composite high performance drones at about the same size physical scale as Chaparral. And so I've known the president of the drone division, Steve Fendley, for years. And when we were getting closer to being ready for manufacturing our system, we started talking, and I pitched this idea. Hey, would Kratos consider being our manufacturing partner? Because you guys are so good at that
Mm.
manufacturing of your systems. And we've got this new aircraft and we're going to have to learn how to manufacture it at scale. Maybe there's an opportunity to work together on this. And so it turns out there is. And we announced this partnership in September, and our teams are now
Yeah.
working side by side, shoulder to shoulder, to productionize our Chaparral and get it ready for mass production. So
Well, I
that,
do
yes,
remember actually
what's the
the
future? That's really
yeah.
that's a part of the future where that's how we'll take this vehicle into production and to scale. And then we've got partners, active contracts and working closely with the Army. We've got partners like Bristow and FedEx that are ready to
Yes.
use these systems. We were recruited by 4 of the EIPP programs that are bidding to set
Wow.
up early operations around the United States. So
Wow.
it's going to be a very dynamic year as we do all these things.
Yeah, EIVPs are absolutely brilliant. I love the idea of that. We've actually had a few people who are involved in them. The last one was Don Birchoff with his True Weather system. Then, of course, and you know what? Who I just had not too long ago. Speaking of Bristow, is David Stepanek, who talked a lot about what they were doing and everything. I love Bristow, also another one of those companies, very pragmatic, very serious. I've seen all of you talk mostly when we were at VFS, and was always impressed by how pragmatic you guys are. So when do you think we'll be able to see the Chaparral up and running? And I know this is, we're not holding you down to an exact date, but when do you anticipate a production and finally to be fully certified to do what it's supposed to do, both,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm assuming military first and of course commercial later?
Well, that's how we had been thinking about rollout over the past few years. I
Mm-hmm.
think the way the FAA is moving now, I think we don't have
That's
to
true.
strictly we don't have to serialize these two the
Really
way we
good.
thought we might. And so we're really going into the market in full dual use mode, where we've got military partners and commercial partners that we think will start to use these systems at roughly the same time.
Wow.
And so that's a strategy shift over the last year and a half or so.
Yeah. So that must complicate things a little bit, because when we have one after the other, it's easier to, just to put all the resources together and all the ducks in a row kind of thing. But when you have both of them, that must complicate how you must divide your resources, who goes in that direction, who goes in that direction, or is that something that just floats seamlessly for you guys?
Well, it will be largely the same aircraft. So all the major systems, the structures, the propulsion, basic avionics, like the aircraft being able to fly well and
Yeah.
perform the way it needs to, should be the same for commercial
Yeah.
and military partners. And what might be different in the military side is different communications equipment that are on board or
Yes.
things like that.
Yes.
So we really do think that the majority of the aircraft will be the same.
Yeah.
But to your earlier question of kind of how does the rollout look? By the end of this year, our plan is to be out running a regular route with a partner. And you'll see that
Wow. Alrighty.
we'll announce the details of that. That'll be with our current C1 aircraft, which is the system that's been up and flying for more than 2 years now. We're also building, like I said, we're designing the kind of mature version, the productized version of that with Kratos. And we're going to be producing the first systems of the productized version this year too. And we expect those to start to enter testing early next year and get to customers by the end of next year.
Wow, so that's really coming up now. So we are on target with 2026, 2027, as most others are talking about. Except I think for you guys, it's actually real commercial development, not just prototype flying, which you've already been doing anyway. So that's pretty quick.
Yeah, well, it's on the back of a 10-year trajectory to get here. So it sounds quick, but it
That's
has
true.
been. This is what gets. Deep tech is not an overnight journey.
No, no. I'm up to my fourth disruptive technology introduction in my lifetime. And yeah, it doesn't happen overnight. The first CD-ROM recorder I ever worked on in 1992 was a cabinet that cost $25,000, right? You can get one for
Mm.
$5 now. That's yay thin. Same thing with phones, cameras. I'm a Nikon guy, so Nikkor Mats and F3s of the 60s I've had, all my life. I know how to develop. Well, now my smartphone does a really good job. It's pretty incredible. Usually around now, we start to get into the more personal aspect of, who is Dave? What gets Dave out of bed in the morning? So what is your motivation for doing all this? I was looking at your background and it's really interesting, and you're marrying different passions. So what is your motivation? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
I'm an optimist and a technologist, and I love being involved in efforts to build useful things with
Mm,
technology. Build useful tools for humans that improves what they can do and
yeah.
improves lives. So that is my fundamental motivation, and that goes all the way back to, the first time I discovered I could program. write a program from a graphing calculator in high school and give
Yep.
it to a friend, and it allowed them to do something they couldn't do before. So that's really, it's like many engineers, you like building
Yep.
things that are useful. So fundamentally, that's it. I also, like I mentioned, I'm a lifelong photographer, and that's actually
Mm.
part of how I got into drones. Was back in the early days before these were polished products, I was
Yes.
kind of following some photography friends into the habit of building a DIY multicopter and sticking a GoPro camera to it and flying it up to get aerial
Yes.
photos. And to me, rewind more than 10 years ago now, like the drone was
Mm.
just the best tripod in the world. You could put that
Yep.
camera anywhere. And that was
Yep.
that was a new capability that was very useful. And I got fascinated by it. So from a, professionally, that's what I love is noticing a new capability that technology is making possible and putting that into a form where it can be useful to a large number of people.
Yeah, that's something that you and I share too, also, because my background was also in photography, and I've always, thought it just opens up such an amazing world. But you're right, right around 2014, 15, when drones were coming up, and you could actually put well, first of all, it was a camera, but then it became a video camera. I thought, wow, this is amazing. I live in Savannah where we have wide marshlands, and I thought, just flying over these marshlands, catching snippets of, I don't know, birds and dolphins and everything. But it's amazing how far we've gone. I actually interviewed Mr. Hu in China from EHang and all of that good stuff. I used to know the DJI guys, and it was really fascinating, those early days of the drone industry. But it's even more fascinating to see where you guys have taken it today and how soon now it really will be flying up in the air. So, and then you're right. Also, another thing too is what got me in this industry is efficiency and what does it do for the human being. That's something that you can't lose that perspective. It's, you're ultimately working for, the human need, the human welfare, and all of that good stuff. And that's something I think we need to always remind ourselves of. So
Yeah, like
it, it's
if you can get goods delivered fast, that improves quality of life. I've seen some of the towns in Alaska where the only way to get goods in
yes.
and out is by air. And there's a little
Yep.
airstrip at the edge of town. And then if the
Yep.
weather's bad, they don't fly that day. And if the weather's bad enough days in the row, the
That's it.
shelves of the supermarket can go empty. And
Yep.
so having a system that can do that without putting the life of a pilot at risk, it
Right.
is going to mean that we can keep the shelves of the supermarket stocked more days, even if the
Yes.
weather's not so
Yes.
good. And so that's the kind of austere logistics that I think really will change
Yes.
lives. And even in areas that have better networks, I love being able to get things same day and next day. And often that enables me to meet my need faster, to do a project faster, to get that
Of course.
medicine faster, vitamins, whatever it is. It's just
Yep.
good. I think it is a good for society to be able to get things rapidly. You don't need to wait. And then for humanitarian shipping, when I first met the World Food Program and other
Oh,
humanitarian shippers,
yes.
they rely on a lot of contracted aviation, a lot of old helicopters that are flying, and a lot of flights every day. And so this isn't putting those companies out of business. This is going to augment what they
No.
can do with fleets of autonomous
Augment. Yeah.
systems that will allow for more deliveries. I don't know if you've heard of the Jevons paradox, which is this finding that when the cost of something gets lower or some service gets more accessible, uh, there's actually more demand for it,
Yeah.
not
Makes
less.
makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That makes
so I
actually a
think
lot of sense. Yeah.
we're gonna have more logistics demand
Yes.
once we have our systems out in the world, and we'll be able to serve that demand. And then on the battlefield, like the risk that flying a piloted helicopter with crew chief and other people on board, when we've talked with military logisticians and just guys that have been in the field receiving material, that risk is real. And
Yes.
the opportunity to use a autonomous unmanned system to fly goods from A to B is obvious to them. It's a no-brainer. Like, yeah, if we have the ability to do that without putting a life at risk flying a piloted helicopter, why wouldn't we do that? So
Yeah. No,
that's the kind of thing that keeps me going is hearing firsthand from people who have been in that situation where this system would really be transformative, and it will be when we have it out there.
no, yeah, it's not a question, whether or not it's a cool technology. It will happen. It has to happen. And I know it makes people scared to think that they'll be flying in airplanes without a pilot on board. You know what? Considering what's already over our heads are doing it right now today, in 10 years, it'll be pretty good and pretty safe. So, and of course, thanks to the wonderful work you guys are doing. So I guess we're getting close to the end of this podcast. So first of all, I want to thank you for being with us today, for taking that opportunity to explain a little bit more what you guys are doing at Elroy Air. Maybe some final words for anybody out there who is watching or listening on all the podcast platforms out there. Anything that you would want people to walk away from with that we've talked about today, or maybe we haven't talked about today?
I think, well, I see what we're doing as inevitable. If we don't do it, somebody's going to do it. And so I want us to be there first. We're going to do it first.
That's well said.
And I would say if you're out there and you see a use case and you need this, reach out. We're always open to talk to more people. Like we've actually got a lot of demand already for these systems, and so we're going to be very busy for years producing them. But I want to hear from you if you've got something else that we haven't even thought of yet. And then for people that are noticing gaps in the world where something could be better, there's a tool that's missing, a system that's missing.
Yep.
It can seem daunting to build a new product or build a new company, but it's regular human beings that do this every time it happens. And so I'd say go for it. If you've identified something that needs to exist in the world and you believe you can be the person to do it and you feel that obsession to do it, go for it.
You said it really well, because that's one of my driving motivations is I might not be the best one at it, but somebody will do it, and I'm here, might as well do it. And if somebody's better, go ahead, please go ahead, do it. I don't care. It's for the industry. By the way, come to Savannah, because there's definitely dire need for what you guys are doing. They've been building a lot of warehouses, I mean, virtually cutting down entire forests. And they celebrated 6% occupancy. And then I look at all these places and they're not that easy to get to. They use trucks on smaller roads. They have enough for a 100 to 500-foot runway. So there you go. Savannah needs your help. We've got highways, we've got railroads, we've got triple gated communities, we've got biggest St. Patrick's parade outside of New York City. So there's a lot happening here, and hopefully I can come up with something for to get you guys over here. That'll be fantastic.
Sounds good. Love to drop by.
Absolutely. Well, Dave, thank you again for taking the time to be with us today, and thank you for explaining everything. And I really look forward to it. I'll ask you, I mean, this is an open invitation, by the way. You can come back whenever you want. It's always a pleasure to have you on this podcast. But hopefully, once you have a live demo, I'd love to, or once you're up and running and really flying in the air, it'll be nice to have you back and tell us a little bit more about what you're doing. And maybe for some odd reason, I can get there and actually film it. That'll be even better. But I hope you can come back and give us some good news very soon again.
Sure. Love to come back once we're up and running with that regular mission by the end of the year. We'll be flying test flights between now and then. And Nicolas, thanks for having me on. It's been great.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. There you go. You were just listening to Dave Merrill, who is now the executive chair of Elroy Air, and the company that he founded, by the way, and was the acting CEO for the past 8 years. So started in 2006. And you've heard everything about what they're doing and why that company is so unique and very different from other companies out there. I hope you enjoyed it. Just would like to remind you to please like and subscribe. That is very important for us so that our ratings go up and we show up more often. And of course, attract more people to look at these interviews I get for you, because I know all of these people and I think they're fantastic, and you should know about them and also what their motivations are. Another thing too is we will soon launch, as of, well, probably by the time you see this, our Patreon platform will launch the Ways We Move Plus. And this is where you have a 48-hour window opportunity of seeing these interviews before they are released to the public. as well as if you want to go to the higher tier, also a once in a month deep dive where I really go further into this. You might have seen by now that we did a great deep dive on beta. The next one will be on, I'm not going to say it. I'll let you figure it out and you can write it in the comment. But here's my question for you. What did you think about Elroy Air? What do you think about what they're doing? Any thoughts on drones? Why do we keep on thinking and keep on looking at the air taxis when, the flying cars are there too? Well, maybe not exactly, but what about the drones? What about the cargo side of it? This is something we've been talking about, at least a lot of us inside of AEM on the infrastructure side. I think that cargo is really the first step. So we hope you've enjoyed this. Share your thoughts. Let us know what's going on. And also share the podcast with people who might be interested. And as always, we're looking for people who work in the electric vehicle industry, in electric railroad industry, and also electric maritime industry. And if you're interested in sponsoring a The Ways We Move podcast episode, please reach out and we'll be happy to talk to you. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week again.